So there's a misconception that if you're single, you are incomplete, perhaps damaged, salvaged, and you won't be happy until you find your one. And that is not true. That is bullshit. It is a message that has been fed to us by media and advertising. The truth is, when you're single, you have the richest soil for growth. That's why I created this podcast. And unlike other podcasts, this one is host-driven, not guest-driven. That means I will be rotating health and wellness experts 3 times a week to give you the giant box of wellness crayons, not just the primary colors, so you can start building a meaningful life. It's time to give singlehood a cape. Today's host is someone I go way back with. His name is Sean Cardinalli. Sounds like a baseball player. He's a coach, writer, and activist who returned to coaching on sex and love addiction at the outset of the pandemic after a 4-year hiatus. He speaks the language, and his coaching style tends to lean toward 12-step recovery, which saved his own life and livelihood 14 years ago. He's also very transparent. Sean earned his local certification through Linda Bark's holistic coaching methodology and is pursuing his ICF certification and a degree in social work. So beyond sex and love addiction, Sean's practice focuses on intimacy, relationships, divorce, dating, and the creative process. Enjoy Sean Cardinalli.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's Sean Cardinalli, sex and love addiction coach. And on this podcast, I have a very good friend of mine, Seth Rodgers. Welcome, Seth.
Hey, how's it going,
Uh,
everybody? Happy to be here.
I'm so glad to have you on. Seth and I go back. You know what, dude? I was thinking. I don't even know. Is it more than 5 years now?
No,
Is it
it's
about 5 years?
actually 3.5.
Three and a
Yep.
half. 3.5 years. Seth and I find that we can sit and talk and solve the world's problems, all good, just the two of us, and yet keep the information to ourselves. We're very jealous with the information. Y'all have to
hmm
pay instead. But no, I love Seth Rogers. He's actually a recovery brother of mine. He's a high school teacher. What's your favorite shit to teach, man?
You know, I'm a math teacher, not because I'm one of those people that's passionate about math and just thinks in numbers all the time, but just because I think it's kind of a fun subject to teach. It's like a puzzle, and it's very concrete, so when students get it, and they don't. So you have a lot of those aha moments. Plus, I just don't know enough about, grammar or social sciences to pull off history or English. But yeah, teaching math, and then also, you know, decided to try out physics for a year, and that's been a blast.
What was that? What was that last part? I think I lost you for a second. You tried to what?
Oh, trying out physics as well. So I'm teaching a physics class in
Oh
addition to
my
math, and
God.
that's just been kind of um, trial and error. But I mean, that's teaching for you.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting to me that you say that. Well, one, I totally appreciate how you like math is either like you got it, you did the equation correctly, or you didn't. That's very for a brain like mine. That's very good. Of course, I'm like completely right brained, and so the history and the writing, the humanities stuff was all my jam. But it's also interesting that you say you couldn't carry the social studies or history or literature or the grammar. That's total bullshit. My man Seth is being super modest. That is actually most of the shit that we talk about: society's ills and society's gains, right? Do a little. How can I characterize it? We do a little transcendentalism. Will we be redeemed? Can we save ourselves? Or are we anti-transcendentalists? No, we're just fucked, and we're just trying to do our best. Well, we're trying to do our best while we're here, either way. But I found over the last 3.5 years that I've had some really good conversations with Seth. So wanted to bring him on for the Single on Purpose podcast and have another one of these conversations. Also, because his personal history and background is really, I think, interesting, not the norm. For someone, you're what? Are you like early 30s? I can't remember. Like I feel
Yeah,
like I'm way older, and yet you're wise as fuck. So how?
I don't know about that, but I'm 31.
Oh my God. I would be 50 this year. Yeah, see, so dude, I swear to God, I would have like, not that you're not youthful and don't look young, but I swear to God, I'd be talking like a fucking 40-year-old or something. And now I'm gonna be accused of being an ageist, but whatever.
There
Anyway,
you go.
Seth was a great guy. He's got a great personality. He's got a great head on his shoulders, and despite the humbleness about social studies or English or lit, again, very smart dude and loquacious, and I appreciate you being here. So the part about your story that's really interesting, what we're going to talk about today is sort of dating and religious convictions. And this was a great topic that Seth chose because there's a lot that he can share on that. And before we get closer to the kernel of that, why don't you tell everybody how Brazil is a big part of your upbringing.
Yeah, so I was born in Michigan, but then when I was 8, my parents, who were missionaries at a time working for a nonprofit Christian organization, decided they wanted to scratch this itch to live overseas. And so our plan was to go to Caracas, Venezuela. And we visited Caracas when I was 7. There was a family, another American family that we were going to partner with there. But, shit started to hit the fan. And as we all know, it's only gone downhill, unfortunately, for the people of Caracas and Venezuela in general. But um,
Right.
so that family decided to jump ship, if you will, after spending, I think, 16 years there. But and the organization said, "Hey, how about you go to Brazil?" And my parents, and this was, mind you, 2 months before we were supposed to go to Venezuela. And my
Mhm.
parents were like, "Hey, why not? Let's do it." So we stopped learning Spanish, started learning Portuguese, and
They're related. It's all
it
good. They just
it overlaps.
you gotta make that zhuzh sound
Exactly.
instead of the
Yeah, as one of my Colombian friends says, he says, "Yeah, Portuguese is just, you know, how you speak Spanish when you're still learning Spanish." So um, I
nice.
disagree, though. I think it's a more sensual, and anyways, we can get into that another time. But yeah,
Right.
so moved to Brazil and spent total of 8 years there. Uh, my, Thankfully, my parents had the um, the wisdom to put me in a Brazilian school, and so I was, completely socialized into Brazilian culture, and it just became not even a part of my identity because it wasn't conscious so much as um, really a part of my fabric. I didn't identify as Brazilian, but I became Brazilian, and that became very apparent when I came back to the States as a 16-year-old. And then, of all places, we moved to Texas and yada yada. But yeah, so Brazil is in my DNA. I love that country, and I'm trying to make my way back.
What you eventually wanna get back? You wanna be have a little more of your adult life out there, like permanently, you think,
Oh
or do
yeah,
you think you'll go and then come back again?
no, I that is where my heart is, and my plan was actually to be there already, but I met my girlfriend, which is an excellent reason to deviate from my plan. And you know,
Oh, she'll be glad to hear that. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So I'm here, and I'm happy to be in New Mexico. I do, of all places in the U.S., New Mexico is one that I feel good about being in. It's not. I get tired of the kind of artificial, commercial, materialistic vibe that you can get from the States. But there's something a little more spiritual and, dare I say, enchanting, despite the slogan. I know it's corny, but it is kind of an enchanting and strange state. It really deviates from the norm of a lot of the, greater US. So I'm cool being here for the time being.
Yeah, it's it's not corny, the enchantment thing. I mean, it's funny. I'm looking at my windows. We're recording. It's fucking
Yeah.
snowing right now. Just FYI, I don't know if you can see out, but yeah. So in the last 48 hours, 72 hours, everybody, it rained, it snowed, it hailed. There might have been frogs. I was waiting for like just let's just go full Armageddon, like and locusts. But no, it is beautiful out here. The land is beautiful. And what I noticed when we came out here 16, 17 years ago was I had never been in a city. And, when we say city, it's a big town.
Hmm.
Albuquerque is not like cosmopolitan. It's not like when you go to Chicago or New York or even San Francisco. But in the metro area, there's still a million people. So it's not like tiny. But I'd never been in a city where you could stand in a spot and you have a 360-degree vista. And just like you have a good accent with your Venezuela and your Caracas and all that. I mean, my kids are bilingual in Spanish, not Portuguese. Their mother is New Mexican, like goes back hundreds of years here. And so, they're fluent. I say the words with the correct accent. And I notice that you do too when you talk about where you've been and where you're from, where you were raised rather. And to see that vista and just go out into the desert and find yourself or lose yourself either way, and then go back up to the mountains. I mean, the mountains are covered with snow right now, the Sandias. It's beautiful. It's beautiful here. So I think I'm glad that you found a place that resonates with you that way. I know you're very, very spiritual minded. We'll probably be talking about the distinction between spiritual and religious, I'm sure, in this conversation. And we can get right to it, though. But no, you're totally right about the Enchanted. There's a lot of spirit here. There's so much history. And so then there's so much spirituality and religion. We know the tougher parts of that history, but there's definitely a place for you to come out, like I said, and find yourself or lose yourself, and it's peaceful. And the pace. When I first moved out here from LA, I remember I had to like downshift my body and mind. The pace is completely different. It's its own thing. That's why the corny joke is actually land of manana. And I think locals don't really dig on that, but some of them also say it. So I don't know. It's like a mixed bag, but it really is like, hey, just, your pace, your space, your pace, your time, do what you like. We don't really enforce stop signs, red lights, or like imposing ourselves on on others. But it's very rich with all the culture here anyway. It very much looks like, right, the Pueblo style everywhere, right? That's not. I go back to California. I'm like, oh look, there's an actual blue house or a green house or something, right? Out here is a lot of tans and browns and then blue. And blue is that, and that comes from
turquoise,
the native traditions. Yeah, turquoise, right. So as far as religion and spirituality, if we're talking about dating and religious convictions, why did you pick the topic? And then let's talk about your journey. Like you said, your parents are missionaries, and I don't know if you can get specific or want to get specific about what thread or strand of evangelism they are. But anyway, let's get into that. Let's get into the background, and then let's talk about how that affected your dating and how it affected you being single, which is like, again, this whole podcast. So,
Right. So when we were in Michigan, we went to an evangelical free church. I think it is what it was called. Basically non-denominational. I don't know if there's, some finer points to that distinction, but for all intents and purposes, yeah, just evangelical free, non-denominational. My parents, to their credit, I think have always been very open-minded and have in many ways kind of helped move the needle forward in making the evangelical circles that they've been a part of slightly more progressive. And, of
okay.
course, within a certain box, a certain Christian paradigm, but nevertheless, they've never strayed away from speaking truth to power and raising the bullshit flag.
Mm,
They've never been much for politics, and so I never had this attachment to a church institution, to a religious institution. It was always more an allegiance to the ideas, which I think is very kind of Protestant at its core. So maybe that's not so unorthodox for the Protestant side of Christianity, but regardless, they did encourage me to think for myself, and I think if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be recording this podcast because I would just be thinking the same way I did when I was in Michigan. But
mm,
I was given the permission, not full permission, but I was still encouraged to think for myself and be critical about the very things that I was learning from my parents and
hmm.
from other adults in my life.
It's interesting. I pulled up Howard Zinn, monster progressive activist and academic. And one of his books and one of his sayings was, "You can't be neutral on a moving train." And that's the line that
Wow.
popped up in my head when you said that they didn't really dive into, or didn't really, affect, or maybe really encourage conversations on politics. And I won't say encourage, I don't want to mischaracterize, but yeah, that's interesting, because you have said clearly they encourage you to get progressive and think for yourself and push the needle a little bit. um, but yeah, even being non-political or apolitical is a political choice, right? And there's also some privilege that comes with the ability to be like, well, yeah, I can just step back. And in fact, it's kind of part of the conversation that I was telling you that I had on another podcast that'll be airing soon. When we got into some politics, I was like, oh shit, it went some different places that I thought. But I appreciate that they,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, encourage you to stretch a bit, right, and challenge a bit, and seek out, um, yeah, knowledge, new means, whatever. How, when you're 16 and you guys get, why did you leave? And then once you got back to the States, what happened as far as your beliefs? Now you're a young man in your teens, you're in high school in the States after being a huge chunk. I mean, you grew up in Brazil, like you said. Oh, and what city, by the way? Sao Paulo or where?
Yeah, we're in the state of São Paulo in a city called Campinas, which is about an hour and a half outside of the city of São Paulo. And it's a medium large city, about 2 million, um, but doesn't necessarily give off the vibes of São Paulo's urban sprawl. So that's where we were. And then in Rio, and that was in college. And that's the city, honestly, that I feel the most spiritual connection to, but it's not
No
where I grew
kidding,
up.
Rio.
Hmm.
Okay, okay. Which one of those cities has the huge statue
But that's you.
of
Yeah.
of
Yeah, the Christ the Redeemer, Cristo Redentor. Yeah,
is in
that's in
Rio?
Rio. Yep.
Okay, okay, yeah. I gotta get down there someday, especially if you go down there. Then we're like, oh, good. Like I have a double reason to go visit my homies and see the amazing land and people and
No,
culture.
absolutely.
Uh, And so you get back, you're 16. Let's just, to get to our topic here. I mean, you're 16. I mean, at 16, we tend to be young, dumb, and full of cum. So
Mm,
when you get back, what are the sort of precepts, or if any, and disabuse me if these are the wrong words, like what sort of, I don't know, limitations or rules, or what sort of doors opened for you through your parents and through coming back to, now you've got to like reacculturate to the States, when really, I mean, 8, you're pretty malleable. You grew up again in Brazil. So you come
mm.
back, and then how does that start to affect your acculturation and then your dating? Um, and again, it's going to be a cultural difference and also a religious cultural difference. So how does that all start to form?
Yeah, I love how you said that. I kind of grew up a second time in Brazil, and that's completely spot on. I mean, in my years in Michigan, my sister and I were just talking about this. We were not socialized very well. My parents, they homeschooled us, right, wrong, or indifferent, and that was great academically, but I really felt stunted socially, and
This is
that
when you came
became
back,
very.
or this was down here
This was in Michigan. This was in Michigan before we went to
before you
Brazil.
left?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So where I was born, and then until I was 8, really, the only person I hung out with on a consistent basis was my sister. you know,
Okay.
and she and I were a little bit feral. I So that so we were both, I think, above average academically because we got so much one-on-one attention from our parents, who both have college degrees and are critically minded and are both teachers at some point. But we didn't know how to be just normal kids with other kids.
Mm,
And we were more
mm.
comfortable with adults because that's most of the people that we spent time with. And so it was like growing up a second time when I went to Brazil. And not only was I not being homeschooled, but I was thrust into a school in a language and a culture that I knew nothing about whatsoever. I knew one word when we moved to Brazil, one word in Portuguese, and then we had
What was it?
I don't even remember. I think it was. I think it was yes, sing, like I think it's something like
Right,
that, but
right.
didn't get me very far. Yet, within a few months, I was fluent in Portuguese. It just, and
No
thinking back, I was
shit.
talking to my best friend from Brazil, and the first day of school, he was like, "Hey, come," kind of like gesturing, like, "Come sit next to me." He didn't speak English, I didn't speak Portuguese, but that's how the friendship started, and I don't remember what it was like to not understand him. It just that was kind of seamless, but and so even though I resisted absorbing Brazilian culture because I was very patriotic, and as in many Latin American countries, they're all too familiar with the dark side of the American government,
Hmm.
and specifically the influence that the American government has had on their more authoritarian regimes, all the dictatorships that the CIA, deliberately encouraged
Hmm.
to fight back
Or
communism,
flipped.
and
Yeah,
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 prevent the domino
yeah.
effect, and all that bullshit. And so they were very cynical about the U.S. government, loved American pop culture, but not so much the political side of things. And so I pushed back, and I was very patriotic, and yet Brazilian culture was still inevitably baked into who I was. And so then coming back to the States when I was 16, I remember vividly we were in the airport, and a part of me was excited to go back to the States because that's where we would go for, vacation, quote unquote. Really, it was more fundraising trips for my parents because all of their income came from churches and people they knew that would make contributions. And so it's just how their organization rolls. But to me, it was where we would go on summers, and it was where I would go to visit family, and maybe go to Disney World. It was just this kind of idyllic place, and an escape from the cultural incongruence that I felt in Brazil. And yet, when I step off the plane and we're met by this customs agent, he says, "Welcome home." And that's when I realized, oh shit, I don't feel at home here. This is not my home. This is my little
Hmm.
escape from my home, but my home is in Brazil.
Hmm.
and and so it was this very strange reverse culture shock, and I felt very out of place. And yet it was worse than being in Brazil in some ways because there was no reason for me to be out of place. I didn't have an accent. Nobody really knew or cared so much that I had lived in Brazil. And so it was like, look, you're a white kid in the suburb of Dallas, like, this, like, you're middle class, like, you've got nothing to bitch about, um, going to
Hmm.
a good public school. So what's the big deal in it? It was difficult for me. So at that point, though, as far as dating is concerned, that was so much at the forefront of my mind. It was taking, don't get me wrong, it was taking up a lot of real estate in the background of my mind, but in the forefront of my mind, I was kind of in survival mode. I've always had kind of blessing and curse of being an overachiever. I think it's more of a curse because really stems from this need for approval and this feeling of
Hmm.
lack and of not measuring up. And so I derive great satisfaction from getting people's attention by doing something that I feel like I have earned, or accomplishing something that I feel like I've earned. And anyways, also some middle child syndrome there, but all that to say, I kind of just like ground myself in school and then athletics. I joined the cross country and the track team. Wanted to join the football team. The coach was like, "Yeah, this is a 5A school in Texas. You've never played football, so you can
Right.
join,
You,
but you're going to be a punching
good
bag."
luck. Right, you're gonna get
Yeah.
flattened. Right, right, right. You weren't part. You weren't raised in the Friday Night Lights zone.
We had a
Yeah, yeah.
multi-million-dollar football stadium at my school that was good enough for the Dallas Cowboys to train on when their training facility was under construction. So,
No.
no, I did not. I did not pursue that. My dad was like, "How about cross country?" I was like, "That sounds great."
Right,
But
right, right,
so
right, right.
I just kind of buried myself in that, and did not, aside from interacting with my peers in cross country and track, which was a motley crew. I um I did not put myself out there very much, and that kind of continued into my college days. And so I kind of just stuck with my mo, which was to have these intense crushes and infatuations for women, but I would keep them at a distance, out of insecurity, out of this feeling that this sense of inadequacy, and then also this sense of obligation, because at the time I
To
was,
your religion.
to, well, yes.
Because I was gonna ask you, like, weren't you proscribed at all, or were you? Let me ask, not
Hmm.
say it in the negative, but were you proscribed? Like, was there a what was the rule for your evangelical parents? What was the rule as far as sex, dating? You gave me a note earlier about when you were 13. Um, you told your parents you were ready to date, and they expressed some hesitance, and then what, so back up to 13 in this book and everything they handle
Yeah.
with you,
So
and then come back up to 16, because we are talking about dating and religious convictions, and is that oil and water, or can it just flow nicely?
mhm.
And so yeah,
Yeah. So
so go to the 13 one, and then catch us back up to being back in the States at 16.
yeah, 13 is definitely a good place to start, because that's when, so I'm still in Brazil at that time, and I there was a girl that I was interested in. Honestly, she was a good person. She was attractive. I'm 13. I'm seeing lots of people dating around me. Brazil is much more liberal sexually than the US. And so,
I've seen the photo beaches, man. I'm like, oof,
oh yeah. Oh
boy,
yeah.
boys.
So
I
I thought, you know what? I would like to try my hand at this dating thing. And I told my parents that, because I always, kind of felt the need to keep them in the loop, and I wanted their approval. And so I told them, I was like, you know what, guys, no, I didn't say guys, but I was like, you know what, I homies, I,
You got a cup
you
of
know,
coffee with your mom and dad in the morning. You're just
right, yeah,
talking about the
exactly.
newspaper.
No, but I said, you know what, I broached the topic, and I was like, you know what, I like, I think I'm ready to date. That's what I said. I think I'm ready to date. And
Hmm.
they were like, well, and they felt like I was too young. And instead of encouraging me to date, they encouraged me to read two books. One was by Rebecca St. James, called Wait for Me. Not Date for Me, but Wait for Me.
Hmm.
Which again became a part of my dating strategy, just waiting.
Hmm.
And then another one, which was even more impacting, was I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris.
Hmm.
And just want to put out there that the author, to his credit, um, although in his book, which he wrote when he was 22, yikes, in his
Wow.
book,
Wow.
his position is basically like, hey, I dated around so much and it doesn't lead anywhere, and so instead of essentially like preemptively cheating on my spouse through all of these frivolous relationships, just don't date to get to know somebody. Get to know somebody through friendships and group setting, and then when you found the right person, get married. But he has, yeah,
Interesting.
he has since, he talks about it on his website. I think it's called Joshua Harris something. He regrets writing that book, and he actually even, to his credit, came out with a documentary where he interviews all the people that felt like they were kind of damaged by the message in that book. Um,
That's a big mea culpa. Like he really, that's in recovery circles, we call that a monster. That's a monster amends right there. That's a
mhm,
big amends. and
absolutely.
and what's interesting to me is the first part that you said he was 22. It's like, dude, if I wrote something
22,
when I was 22, I mean, come on. The
exactly.
farther away you are from it, the more you realize that's kind of absurd. Like, you can be a poet or an artist.
Mhm,
Well, okay, let me not, again, people, God, I'm going to sound like ageist, like every time, like I'm this grumpy old man, like wagging my finger, like you kids. But yeah, I mean, if you're talking about something as instrumental, when
exactly.
most of us in our earliest 20s are, I mean, that's when you can, if you played it cool until then in America, I don't know what it is in Brazil, but you can go out. You're driving. You're about to get out of college if you go to college, or you've been working a couple of years if you haven't, and you're now drink if you can. So those are your exploding years socially, right? Like,
Mhm,
it's just like coming off you in waves, right? I mean, and you're not in school anymore, or you're just getting out. So there's this sense of freedom. This is like when you start. And so this guy is saying, no, 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 let's let's draw that back in. Let's not sort of, Alan. Alan's a friend, a mutual friend of ours. He and I did a podcast on um, uh, dating, dating like single on purpose. We were doing this dating on purpose, or dating as practice. And so it's the exact
Mm,
opposite of this guy
gosh.
Harris's philosophy, which is like, no, go out and be you, learn to be you, learn about yourself in a social and a potentially romantic
Mhm.
situation across from someone, right? Where you're building something potentially. And then if not, okay, it's practice. You just go and do that again whenever you want to, right?
Yeah,
Or like the podcast, you stay single or whatever. But go ahead.
I'm shaking my head because I'm just like, why did why did you and Alan not descend from the heavens and tell me that?
Just 15, 17 years ago or
You
whatever.
know,
Yeah,
why,
yeah. Yeah.
why? Do you like
So your parents,
yeah, go ahead.
it'll be like an intervention. We're
Yeah,
like, we're
exactly,
gonna
like
we're gonna help
Yoda,
your future self.
right? You know, right?
It's like a force ghost. We would have been force ghosts,
Exactly.
but no. Uh, 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 so your parents put these books in front of you, and
Mm.
how do you remember your reaction to them? You're 13, but again, you're very astute. You guys are this like really academically minded and education minded family, plus evangelical.
hmm
I'm sure you read them, right? Did you read them front to
Oh
back or no?
yeah, I read them and I accepted them hook, line, and sinker. I was very conscientious and also very compliant. I wanted the approval of the adults in my life, and they were all Christian and they all had similar ideas. I mean, one of our family friends, incidentally, the mother of the girl that I was interested in, she told my mom one time after meeting our teacher, one of our Portuguese teachers, as in like an English teacher in the U.S., but in Brazil, who was a young woman in her 30s, attractive, wore flattering clothes, not inappropriate at all. Maybe there's like a little bit of cleavage, which was absolutely acceptable culturally, and yet this the mother of my crush told my mom, I'm kind of I would be concerned for my son's thought life. But the teacher, and I
Thought
was like,
life.
exactly, thought life,
Whoa, that is
thought
so
life.
telling right there.
Hmm.
Dude, I've never heard those two
Yeah,
words come together like that.
yeah.
That is fucking amazing.
So I those were the people that I was looking up to, that I wanted to please, and the books told me how to.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
for somebody that was very prone and is still recovering from black and white thinking, it made total sense. Why dabble in the gray, in the messy, icky gray of dating when you can just
Hmm.
go from being friends with really very little on the line, very little risk of
Hmm.
rejection without having to put yourself out there, and then just fast forward to marriage. I think at a subconscious level, it kind of seemed like a really good deal because it
Hmm.
allowed me to just forego, the vulnerability of really trying out dating, which is a challenging journey. But I really wish I had had somebody in my corner that encouraged me to do that because I just kind of hunkered down and I wasn't. I know I was a little antisocial. I I wasn't a complete, you know, I wasn't a complete loner, but I just did not put myself out there enough. And then, paralleling this was also my struggle with pornography. And so I was
Hmm.
introduced to pornography when I was 10, to internet pornography. A friend of mine was, well, not really a friend, but a classmate was over to do a group project, and I knew nothing about the internet. Even though the internet was really scaling up and something that, we had Google and whatnot at the time. This was 2000 and I want to say 2002. I didn't know how to use it, and so instead of Googling songs that I liked, my favorite Eminem songs or whatever, or Red Hot Chili Peppers, I would wait every week for Friday night when it would be on the top 10 countdown of Brazil's MTV. But this kid, he kind of
Nice.
changed everything
You're
for
old
me, and it
school.
was like, show me this music website, which on the side had ads for kind of softcore porn, and of course I took a mental note, came back to it, and kept coming back to it. And this really just wrecked me because I felt this total dissonance. I felt like a complete fraud whenever I'd look at porn because I'm trying to be this goody two shoes, this Christian boy, this saint, and then I felt like I was doing this abominable thing, and so really just kind of taking both sides of my quote unquote double life to the extreme in my mind, when in reality they were a lot closer than I thought to each other, and what I was doing was not healthy, but it also wasn't as
Hmm.
bad as I thought. And and who I was as a Christian was also not healthy, and was not as
Hmm.
good as I thought. But all that
So
to
you've got the typical guilt and
oh yeah,
shame and all that
oh yeah.
brewing. You don't have an outlet because of these. You've essentially been restricted. I mean, self-restricting, but also your parents,
Mhm.
kind of literally put in front of you like
Mhm.
these. This is how we shepherding you, but not toward it, but really away from
Exactly.
dating and that those crucial sort of developmental steps. I remember when my son, he's going to kill me if he ever plays this back. He's 16 now, and he's like 6'2". He's just grown like a weed. But I remember when he was 12 or 13, shorter than me. I'm only 5'8". He was little, and God, he might have even been 12 because I think it was right at the cusp of junior high or just before, and we all went to, so he has, right, me and his mom and stepdad, right, my ex-wife and the stepdad, and everyone was at a table at one end of Olive Garden, and then my son and his little girlfriend who he wanted to take out on a dinner date were at the other end just
Ah.
by themselves and ordering and everything. And how different, how contrasting a scenario is that from what you experienced. And look, maybe even that isn't for everybody, but there was nothing, 0% negatives, something percent
Mm.
salaciousness or anything. It was a boy who wanted to do something on his own socially with a girl, and we encouraged that. And
Mm.
we're like, you guys are young, you're not going to go like just be somewhere around adults by yourselves, and of course we'll pay the bill and blah 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 blah. But still, it was just really cute and sort of fostered that, if you want to do this, just, ask and we'll drive you or do that and everything. And, again, now he can drive himself wherever and go, and he goes and meets his friends wherever he does. But I just thought of that contrast, compared to here are two books that, the word that kept popping up when you were talking, Seth, was repress. And I don't mean
Mm.
that to shit on your parents.
Mhm.
It's just, we can talk about, at one point you had mentioned, like, we probably won't have time now. We'll just do a part two on this or just have another interview with you, but another session. But, you were mentioning dating practices and other cultures and religion and all this. And we know that in some countries and some places, or still even here, probably for evangelical families, there's arranged marriages, or it's all very sort of circumscribed. And you have the pros and the cons from the folks themselves. Like, especially, I'm no expert, so I want to make that clear, but especially if we're talking outside of the United States, you will hear like, well, I mean, it wasn't like love or whatever, but they put us together and we made a go of it. And then you also hear like, oh my God, I want my own, sense of plotting the course of my own life, not just educationally, not just socially, but sexually and intimately. And so, these books sort of like put a break on that potential for that growing process. And then unfortunately, like you're saying, you bump right into, just like me and so many others did, bump right into, and we're like almost 20 years difference in age, but the power of porn, especially internet, is, I mean, it's just, the access is just, so you have these two contrasting but
Mhm.
concurrent situations. I mean, go back up to 16 then, or even, I think you were even going up to college. And didn't you at one point have a dating scenario or two, and a sexual scenario, one or two or whatever? And again, what's going on in your mind in those scenarios vis-a-vis this religious upbringing, right? Religious convictions, sort of hardcore, convictions.
Yeah, I really did not give myself permission to dabble in the dating world until I had cut ties with the religion that I was brought up in. And
Mm.
by the way, I just want to
How
say I love what, the story you told of your son having a date at the other end of the table, and I love that. That is beautiful, and that's the way it should be. That is so healthy, and it's such a fantastic way of encouraging your kids to be transparent about their dating life with you, to seek your counsel, and then also to encourage it as something familial, and to just kind of raise your kids through that. I feel like my growth in dating was absolutely stunted.
mm.
It was, kind of uprooted as a small little plant in some ways. Not to sound too dramatic, but honestly, in hindsight, and
Hugely impactful.
very,
Hugely
yeah,
impactful.
very much so. And so porn was like this, I think, kind of relief valve. Not a good one, mind you, but that's what was going on. It was, the only way for me to override those very black and white convictions that were hampering me
Hmm.
was to just, you know, pull the breaker and just shut it off completely and throw
Hmm.
caution out the window. And that's how my first sexual encounter went. And so in college,
Before you go
yeah,
there, I'm sorry, hang on. Before you go there, I want, in case no one has ever heard either of us speak, uh, 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 I called Seth my recovery brother when we first started this podcast, and that is in and around sex and love addiction. And I want to make it clear that I will not speak for you, Seth, but I am not. I always put this out here so people know where I'm coming from. I am not just anti-porn like fundamentalist style. I can't do it because it's unhealthy for me. It's destroyed my relationships, my job opportunities, my career, and even parenting trajectory. And so I had to surrender that, get the therapy, get the 12 step. That's how I met you. And then proceed, right? To do intimacy and sexuality healthily. And for me, that doesn't include porn. So when we're talking about, when folks listening are hearing like Seth's experience with porn or mine, or these early sexual experiences, not only is it the religious and those factors in your life, but it's also that the porn became more than, it became more than just an experience as youth. It became overwhelming and, like we call it, cunning, baffling, and powerful, to where it's affecting the day to day management and healthfulness of your life. Is that fair?
yeah. And in my case, it wasn't so much because of the volume of porn that I was consuming, because it was probably pretty moderate compared to my peers, and yet the effect was just so palpable. The degree of the experience was so extreme for me. It was like going from 0 to 60. I,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I didn't even kiss a girl until I was 21.
Wow. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
because so in college, just kind of staying on the same trajectory as high school. I'm going to a military academy, so it's even more stifling, even more demanding, and I just kind of buried myself in that grind. And
Mm.
and now if I thought that being an overachiever was encouraged in high school, it was super encouraged, because even my social performance to a degree had a number attached to it, had a GPA attached to it. My
Mm.
physical performance had a GPA attached to it, and then of course my academic performance. And so I had every excuse in the world to just insulate myself in this little bubble of performance, and to not really take any chances socially out in the dating world. And but then my saving grace came kind of in two parts. The first was I my best friend, who's still my best friend, we met in a Bible study, and
Mm.
then he, being less risk averse than me, and kind of chases
That's a
after
great way of
risk.
putting it.
He
That's a great way of
yeah,
putting it. Is this an American friend or a Brazilian friend?
American friend. He was also going to the same college as me, college entre comillas, because of military academy. So it wasn't really the college life, but he became, long story short, an atheist. And so then, and through the process of me trying to convince him that he was wrong, I convinced
Mm.
myself that I had a lot of borrowed convictions. And so I was like, shoot,
Did you
maybe
say barbed?
borrowed. Yeah,
Borrowed. Okay.
borrowed convictions, things that I had kind of just accepted because of external motivators, as opposed to really um, internal realizations. And so that kind of freed me up to question what I was believing. And then before I knew it, I was like, you know what, I don't associate with Christianity, and a lot of it has never really made sense to me. And so I'm not like anti-Christianity, but I am agnostic. And at this point in my life, I would say I'm not agnostic because I do have a deeper sense of faith than I did at the
Hmm.
time. But I,
Right now, you're talking
yeah,
about.
right now, but I do not consider myself a Christian, although I still hold many Christian, or let me rephrase that. I hold many of Jesus's teachings near and dear to my heart.
Hmm.
So little side note there, but I'd become an agnostic in college. And then, so that was part one of my kind of transformation. Part two was I signed up for a study abroad semester back to Brazil. So it was kind of like
Okay.
study home, not abroad.
Right.
But
Right.
I tricked the I tricked my school into sending me there. Didn't trick them. I mean, they knew that I spoke Portuguese, but I did a really good job of marketing myself. I said, oh, I hope the
Right.
other
Right.
guys
I
that
will be a
go, it,
fantastic
exact,
representative.
exactly. I'm going to be an ambassador. I'm going to be, anyway. So and they loved it, and so they sent me, and it was just like mind blown because so many things happened at once. I am I'm for all intents and purposes a civilian in this big city with a good amount of disposable income. I say a good amount, it wasn't that much, but to me it seemed like a ton. Just my per diem, that my allowance that I was given by the military, and I have free reign on this city. My classes, my schedule was easy in comparison because I didn't have all this military bullshit to contend with and juggle. And there's all these beautiful women. I mean, at this military academy, there's only 20% girls, and most of them are already called for. And so, or sorry, not I don't want to say called for. That makes it sound like people were calling dibs on them. They were already in relationships for the most part. And so,
Hmm.
so it was just like total contrast, and so many opportunities for me to kind of put myself out there and meet interesting women from all sorts of countries, because there were tons of other exchange students hailing from all around the world. And and so but again, kind of going back to the escape valve approach, to this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde approach to sexuality, I still hadn't really turned the corner on that and found a healthy balance. And so instead of just starting off in a relationship, my first kiss was going to a club in Brazil and then making out with a stranger who I never saw again. That was
Hmm.
that was the only way that I could again bypass my very rigid ideologies that I was still trying to shake, that I still had this firm allegiance to at a very subconscious level, even though I didn't consciously subscribe to the ideals anymore. And so I
Did you need alcohol as a lubricant that
Yes,
night?
absolutely, absolutely. I think there was alcohol involved, and then I wanted to impress the two guys that I was with, and so and yet I am like shaking because I'm
Right.
so
Right.
nervous because I've never even kissed a girl.
You, again, like we talked about the trajectory, you're doing at like what, 21, 22,
21, yeah,
or yeah, what we usually tend to get a head start at like 13, 14,
yep,
15. Even if it's 16, that's fine. Like that may be quote unquote later, especially for Gen Z, like my kids, my teens age, but still that's like all right. It's still part, it's in the soup of
mm-hmm,
what's going on right then, right? And you didn't have any of that.
mm-mm,
Yours was repressed, and then like you're saying, you have this. I was gonna call porn your cock blocker. It's like because it wasn't good, and that's crude. It also misses the point that we're talking about healthy sexual growth, and that was impeding you, as well as the religious convictions right? So you have this one little, you have your stash, like we call it, you have your secret little thing over here with the porn that's saying, come to me instead. And then you have these religious convictions. And so you kiss the girl in the club, and that happens. And when is your next or first or whatever dating or sexual experience, from then?
Yeah, so I kind of want to go back to what you said about porn as being a cock blocker. I think that's a great way to put it, and I think that's why you and I um, abstain from porn, not because we're saying that it is unequivocally, categorically, inherently bad, but because, for people like you and me, it was allowing us to live in our minds instead of living in our lives. And
Mm,
so it was cock blocking us not just romantically, but just from the beauty of life. And
from
so
everything.
yeah, so that I just wanted to echo that. But after after I lost my kissing virginity in that dingy little club in Rio, I was like, oh shit, like something, it just gave me this confidence. It kind of it started to nurture some confidence that, you know what? A, wow, girls, I can approach a girl cold turkey, you know. Yeah, I was a little awkward, but it was still a good experience. I still enjoyed it. I think she enjoyed it. And I'm okay. I'm not on fire yet. I haven't burned up, I
You
haven't been
didn't go to
struck by
hell.
lightning.
Right.
Like I can do this. I can do this. And so there was this girl that caught my attention, and she was just a really free-spirited exchange student from Mexico, and I befriended her, and then, in my own kind of bumpy way, started dating her, and then we had our first kiss. It was much more romantic. It was on the beach. I was still nervous, but it was good. And that was kind of my first, that was, that was the relationship I wish I had had when I was 13.
Hmm.
Um, but something that you and I talk about in recovery is to not regret the past or shut the door on it. And so it's
Hmm.
okay that I didn't have it when I was 13, because I did have it eventually. And I
Hmm.
started, in a sense, kind of making up for lost time, if you will. And so we had that. I call it a relationship. It was never official, and it was only a few months, only while the semester lasted, and then we parted ways and went to our respective countries. But I stayed in touch with her, and she remained a friend, and it was a really beautiful connection that we had, and a very genuine one. And so that was kind of what launched me into the dating world. But we were not sexually active. Um, and she was not religious, but she was more conservative. And as any listeners that are familiar with Mexican culture know, it is much more conservative, um, sexually and religiously, than many other countries in Latin America, much more so than Brazil.
Super
Um,
Catholic. I
very
mean,
Catholic. Yep.
very Catholic, and you can have. I mean, I imagine like Brazil, and
Hmm.
I won't misspeak. I've been to Mexico a couple of times because I have family down there, and yeah, I mean, again, socially will be different, and in some ways a little more loose than America, but then in
Hmm.
other ways, like you better get your ass. You can go party on Friday, but you can get your ass into church on Sunday,
Yes.
right? And and
Yes.
and like very steeped in that. So yeah, so go ahead. So you had this relationship and this
Hmm.
experience with her that wasn't like sex per se, but sexual
Hmm.
and intimate,
Yeah.
and you stayed in touch. And then what happens next? Because what I want to do is, of course, because you and I, again, this is what we do in just in our lives, sit and talk and listen and share with each other. I want to end, if you're all right with it, I want to end in the next few minutes with, if you're comfortable with it, that first sexual experience, and then we'll just do a part two, because brother, I have like a page of notes, these amazing notes that you gave that I think would help um, impart, some wisdom, some experience, some strength, some hope to folks who again have a similar sort of. What came up in my head as you're sharing is the word retarded, not in the pejorative, but literally your growth was retarded
Hmm.
as a result of this evangelical. And again, your folks don't sound, socially a little more progressive, even religiously a little more progressive. It's not fire and brimstone, even though you just joked about like, I didn't catch on fire. I didn't like fall into a vortex of hell, because I kissed a girl and hung out with her for a summer or a season. And so I just think it's I think it's healing to hear the kind of thing you're sharing, because people who have been in a similar experience, I have a friend who was raised in a fucking evangelical cult, for God's sakes. I mean, people who
Hmm.
hear these sort of repressive stories then can have some hope that they can be single on purpose, dating on purpose. They can have a sexual, healthy, progressive lifestyle or livelihood on purpose, and not, the keel can be evened, right? The ship can be righted.
Hmm.
um, it's not a condemnation just because the earliest part of the development was, again, retarded, was cut off from what it
Yeah.
might have been.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think what made it difficult for me to unentangle myself from those more conservative ideals that weren't serving me later in life, maybe served me in some ways, but that I didn't want to be encumbered by anymore. But what made it so difficult to unravel that was the fact that my parents were not overtly oppressive, at least not to me. My sister has a different perspective, but as the compliant middle child, people pleaser, I didn't realize that that was something that had been inculcated in me to the degree that it was, because my parents, they were not by any means the fire and brimstone kind of people. And they, I mean, they would have host parties at our house, and if they were making a little Brazilian cocktail, they'd give me one when I was a teenager, and so,
Nice.
seemingly very progressive in some ways, but not so much in the dating world. But then, kind of fast forwarding back to college, I come back from that semester abroad in Brazil. It was this amazing experience, and then also amazing for some spiritual reasons as well. And that's where I kind of um, started building up my own faith, from ground zero.
Hmm.
It just, yeah, just
And
it
you
was really
and
beautiful.
you came back agnostic, like you were saying. You came back
Agnostic,
open to
but
some skepticism, some
yeah,
questioning.
agnostic. But now I started the semester pretty agnostic, pretty like, hey, I don't know. And then I ended the semester, I guess you could say, agnostic with a twinkle in my eye. you know?
A hopeful agnostic.
Yes,
There's
exactly.
something there. I'm gonna keep, reading up on it and
Yep.
meditating on it.
Yep, exactly. I felt this
All
connection
right.
to life at large. And
Sure.
but then again, I still had some pretty deeply rooted beliefs about sex specifically. I still very much so did not want to have sex until I got married. That still made sense to me.
Mm.
It made sense, right? That way I don't risk getting an STD. I don't risk getting a girl pregnant, and
You just don't
I
risk
just
even
don't
healthy
risk,
risk, like we
exactly.
like we talk about, even healthy risk. Yeah.
I don't risk becoming too attached to somebody that I might not end up with in the long term. And it was a very, it was a very comfortable way of living and dating or not dating. And yet again, it's so funny. So I go on spring break again with my best friend, the crazy redhead, and we go to Cancun. It was me, him, another friend, and then my best friend's girlfriend. And we're at this, one of those typical all-inclusive resorts that cater to spring breakers. We're
Right.
sitting at the table having a cocktail from the open bar, and uh, my best friend Joe, his girlfriend, was asking me about what I thought about sex and whatnot at this point, since I was no longer Christian. And I told her, I was like, I think I still want to wait until I get married to have sex. And then that night I get plastered, have, a few tequila shots too many, and end up in bed with a girl that I had just met,
Mm.
who was kind of a party animal herself. And
Mm.
um and it
Another American.
that another American. Yep,
Mm.
yep. And so that it was, but these kind of 0 to 60 experiences, they
Oh.
just they weren't helping my cause, because then in my mind it was like, well, that's what having sex outside of a marriage is, and I don't want that, because I was just drunk out of my mind.
Mhm.
It felt
Were
like
you safe?
I would I no
Mhm.
no protection. um
Mhm.
and I knew that and she even told me she had had sex with a different guy the night before, and probably a different guy the night before that. And
Mhm.
as far as the intercourse itself was concerned, it was felt like I was just masturbating with her body. There was no connection and
Wow.
very, very little pleasure as well because of the numbing effects of alcohol. And I was
Right.
just like struggling to stay awake. So
Hmm.
really
I was gonna joke to stay up, but yeah,
that
no,
too, it was definitely a
you've
one and
painted a
done.
really, yeah, you've painted a really clear picture,
Yeah,
yeah, of the experience. Go ahead.
which just kind of reinforced that false dichotomy of either you're waiting until you're getting married or you're just throwing caution to the wind and jumping into the hookup scene,
Right,
which is the
right.
extreme that I Kiss Dating Goodbye kind of painted as the alternative
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
waiting until marriage. There was no healthy middle ground. And again, in recovery, we talk all about living in the gray and the messiness of life, and that's kind of where the action happens. But so that, yeah. So again, that strange, fairly unhealthy experience, potentially risky. I mean, I come back from spring break and I'm getting an STD check, and I'm just like, oh my God, I
Right.
what if I got
Waiting
her
for
pregnant?
results.
Yeah, waiting for a result, and
Right.
you know, it, so yeah, not great, but yeah.
What would you? I think, like I said, that I think that's a great place to pause
Hmm.
here and come back because again, dude, you're so astute. Your turns of phrase. I'm a writer, and I'm like writing down. I'm scribbling notes. Like, oh my god, use that in the podcast description, and also use that in like a book. So dude. You're so eloquent and incisive. I want to come back with you and we'll go through the additional bullets and the broader topic and maybe even catch up today. So get permission from your current girlfriend and see how much that let's not offend or anything like that. But see if what if anything you can speak on there, anonymously, not saying any names, but I'd like to then connect from that experience to your more
Hmm.
present day, how you healed from this religious conviction sort of firewall, that you've now jumped over, as far as your sensuality, sexuality, both your religious convictions and your sexual convictions or aspirations change. And I sort of wanted to end with you with, what do you think, especially now through recovery, which is an intimacy, behavioral, spiritual journey that you've been on and that we've shared and fostered and supported one another in this process, because I call it a way of life, right? I call it my livelihood, not just like, oh, I do something, I go to meetings, I say this all the time, right? This has now become part and parcel of how I live my days, right? I mean, like a Buddhist would say they do, or like some other spiritualists would say, or vegetarian, right? Like they do that as a part of their life. And I know that you have taken up these healthy convictions as well. And so, with that current outlook in mind, as a 30 something year old man, early, fucking God, you're so young. I had no idea. See, that's how fucking wise you are. What would you like to tell your 13-year-old self? How can you sort of hold that younger you and some kind of encouragement, or what message would you like to, and we'll end on this. What message would you like to share?
Mm. Oh, I would tell 13-year-old Seth, I would say, you know what, man? You have so much to offer. Get out there, get messy, make mistakes, just like Miss Frizzle taught you in Magic School Bus. The world is big, and to quote um, a priest, Richard Rohr, you can't think your way to the right life. You have to live your way to more right thoughts. So have some fun. It's okay to make mistakes. Um, and no matter what, you are going to be okay because you are worthy of love. And
Mm,
that's it.
that's amazing. That's a way, and of course, I scribbled even more notes. You mentioned Richard Rohr. You're talking about you're going to be okay. Go ahead and make mistakes. Beautiful ending. We'll get back to even more of this next time we talk. And Seth Rodgers, good friend of mine. I love you, brother. And I really appreciate your time talking with us and sharing on dating and religious convictions, and how, in your experience through that, all these dichotomies and all these, hot and cold and black and white experiences. Um, and I'm glad to know you and learn from your healthfulness now and your spirituality. So thanks. And let's do this again, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Sean. Had a blast, and I hope some people can glean a thing or two from my experiences, maybe help them unravel some of their own knots.
I think it will. I think it will for sure. So have a good day, everybody. And we'll be back some other time soon. Take care.
I hope that episode was helpful. Hey, listen, if you want to share your singlehood journey, if you've gone somewhere and come back, if you have revelations and wisdom, please share your story. It's going to help other people. Nothing makes us feel more connected than hearing other people's stories. So just send me the audio of your story, and you could just record it directly from your phone and email it to theangrytherapist@gmail.com. Also, if you want our Single on Purpose newsletter, go to singleonpurpose.life. That's singleonpurpose.life. You will get tools and articles and other people's stories, and also Zoom links to private gathers. So if you want to join our community, go to singleonpurpose.life. Thank you for listening. Be well. We hope you tell a friend. Hey, before you go, I want to invite you to the Single on Purpose private community online. It's off of social media, no ads, no algorithms. We got forums, we got live groups, we got webinars, and we have social hangs. We also have offline in-person hangs happening soon. So check us out. Go to singleonpurpose.life. That's singleonpurpose.life, and I will see you inside.